So let's pick up from where we were before. This is now our second functions video. It's still on a very basic concepts, but I'm deliberately taking time over this to give you time to look at the code and how it works. So let's go and have a look. We left it with a question, what goes here? Well, what's very clever about a function, and just like a business department, if you listen to the previous video in the sequence, is that you pass the function these two numbers in this bracket. It can then use that information and do the operation. Now this is a very simple operation. It's taking number 1, taking number 2, and it's adding them. Right, there's your plus sign. And then what it's doing finally is tied to this word here, return. It's a very powerful concept, this idea of return. So let's take our analogy. We've got a business department, we pass it some information, we ask it to do, it knows what it's going to do with it, and it gives something back to us. And that's how this function works. You give it something, it does something with it, and it gives you the result. So that is it. That is a simple add function. Let's just move it down a bit because the environment's complaining. Now let's scroll back down. So I've built a very simple function. Let's scroll down and look at this line here. What I want to do is replace a plus b with my function. I want to pass the values I get from my input into the function. It will then take it in here, it'll add them together and give me the result. And how do I do that? It's very simple. To call the function add, to use it, you type it in, you open a bracket, and you put in there the values you want to send the function. And that is it. That is all you have to do. Let's create a space there, and let's just talk about this. So that is now going to repeat a simple add operation, but it's going to do it by taking in, using this function here. Again, please, this example is deliberately simple and straightforward because we are concentrating on the concept of a function and how to use them and why to define them, rather than just really complex functions. Once you get it at this level, as you'll see as the videos go on, there'll be some complex, really quite complex and clever uses of functions. We use it, and notice it's on the right hand side of the equal sign. It's over here, it's not over here. You open the bracket and you put your numbers or your values into here, which we are going to take from here. You could, if you wanted to, alternatively just write two numbers like that, and the function would do what you need it to do. Okay, so what happens then? Well, it does this operation. So actually what the code does is it comes to here, passes them into here, jumps up to here, uses these two parameters, as they're called, input parameters, acts on them and gives back the sum. The sum then comes on over here and jumps and ends up in result. So what we should expect to happen is add, gets the input values, and then outputs them. Nice and simple, should expect no real problem. You should code this because I'll give you a couple of exercises to build out of the back in a moment. So let's just run it. Please enter two numbers. So we do 23, 45, and nice. Again, very, very useful that we have an error. Now this is interesting. What is the meaning of this error? And as I say in videos, the more errors we have when we write simple code, the better for you. It's called a type error. Look at the nature of the message. Right? It's saying there's a problem here. It's saying float object, not iterable. Well, float, I ask myself, what does that mean? Then I look back up here. And do you notice I put a dot, not a comma, between the two values? So actually I ended up entering a single value, not two, single value, which was a fraction. And I didn't give a second value, so it had a problem. That's a good problem a good error to look at. So let's do it again. 23, 45, and the answer is 68. So again, a very simple procedure just to create a simple add function. Now, if you find that reasonably straightforward, what I would do is create a subtract function. Pass in two numbers. Keep it simple in this early step so you can just work the concepts. That needs now some code in here. So I'm going to put a hash here, put your code here. What about a multiply function? Let's pass it in number 1 and number 2. Of course, if you pass in different things, you can make it more complex, less complex. Put your multiply code in here using the example of the add. In here, put your code here. And bear with me a second, let's just get it the same. And you can create some other functions. And all you need to do to test this, that they work, is you come down to your main program and replace the function here. Keep everything else the same so you can test it. This essentially becomes what we call a test shell for a function. And I use that language of a test shell because this is very standard practice when you're building functions in real programming life. You create a function, but you have to test it. The only way to test it, not the only, but one really important way, is to simply use it. And use it and control the situation you're using it and check it gives you the result it should. And then you can work your way through each of these. So I would do this, add, subtract, multiply, and maybe a divide, but divide is actually quite messy because you can end up with odd values dividing by 0 errors. You can end up with all kinds of different things. All of these simple operations, incidentally, can end up, because they're dealing with numbers, with complex issues. So your task is to take the add function, and in the next video we will test out what that code looks like very, very briefly, and then have a go. Test each of them one by one by replacing the word add with the name of the different function, see if it works. And hopefully in that process it will give you a flavor of using a simple function to do some action in your program.